Well, Oscar, first of all, thank you so much for being with us this morning to talk with us about a very important program. It's just a pleasure to be able to talk with you at any time. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind talking about, because so much of what we've been talking about with your program is this question of mentorship and the importance of it. Could you talk about some of your earlier educational experiences and who some of your important mentors were?
Mm-hmm. That is a very interesting way of approaching a discussion of IPPD, because I was fortunate to be educated in some of the better engineering schools in this country. And it turns out that at the undergraduate level, because these schools were so selective, there was not much of a mentorship program of any kind. I am talking about the time when I did not have as much gray hair. My very first experience with an engineering educator mentor was when I did my master's at Northwestern University. That's when I understood the enormous influence that one teacher can have, not in the near future outputs, but in the lifelong approach to learning and to tackling engineering programs that one person can have. So the answer to the question is, in those days, mentorship was not one thing that you were given. IPPD has turned this around for the students who go through the College of Engineering at the University of Florida. Mentoring happens to be the core activity in IPPD because the professor, which in this case is called a coach, works very, very closely with a group of 5 or 6 students. So the environment is prime for providing a mentoring environment, and the support mechanism that IPPD puts in place allows that process to go forward and have significant impact.
Mm-hmm. Could you describe that support mechanism?
IPPD has grown through the years to become a very well-structured engineering training program. So the mentor doesn't have to improvise when selecting the topics that need to be reinforced for the benefit of the student. Something that an engineer needs to do for success, which we do not normally teach in most of the engineering disciplines with the exception of one, is project management. How do you determine what you need to do, when you need to do it, who is going to do it? The life of a student in the American educational system reduces to one thing: prepare for that exam. And that sometimes means if you can do it the night before, you're still going to be equally successfully than if you did not do anything during the semester. In an engineering project, you cannot leave anything for the last minute. There's just too many people involved, too many things to do in a timely fashion. So the program teaches a structured way of managing a project, but just teaching something doesn't mean that the students will do it. Just because you went to the lecture, because you read a chapter, that does not guarantee compliance. So that's when the coach needs to make sure that the students understand how this is done and corrects the behavior of the group on a weekly basis, so that at the end of 2 semesters, these students have had the opportunity to become very competent on the one attribute of an engineer that is going to make the most difference in their careers, their ability to manage a complex project.
Mm-hmm. And Oscar, you're doing a wonderful job of talking about the project management skills. Can you kind of roll that out and describe one project that comes to mind as being a great kind of concrete example of how this model is put into place?
Yes. We have been recently working with the students in a project that involves building a machine, a prototype of machine that eventually Siemens is going to utilize in all their power plants in the world. it turns out that you have to measure how much silt is in the water that goes into a power plant, because if there's too much silt, that is mineral deposits, sand, if there's too much of that, the membranes that filter the water get clogged, and that's a very, very expensive operation. You have to shut the plant down. So you need to actually do something to the water. You add a flocculant to make them precipitate. And in order to determine if the water has a lot of silt, you have to pass a sample stream of water through a filter and figure out how long it takes the water to get through that filter. The longer it takes, the more silt there is. And this is done with the very exclusive dedication of engineers who have to spend the whole day just taking these measurements. So my students, on their own, came up with an idea of mounting 25 filters in a wheel. And that wheel turns and presents a filter to the water stream, measure how long the water goes through, and reports the results to a centralized control system. Then 1 hour later, it turns again and takes another test. So we can go essentially for 24 hours plus one, automatically testing this water, essentially without human intervention until the last filter is used. Now, to make this work, you need to build the wheel. That requires mechanical engineers. You need to figure out what motor is going to turn that wheel. That requires electrical engineers. You have to design the software that's going to say, wheel turn, take the measurements now, make a tight seal with the filter so that the water doesn't splash all over. Well, that requires software engineers. And to make those decisions, you need a microcontroller. So now we need somebody who has, electrical and software engineering skills to be able to program a computer to do this. And now when you think that you're done, you're flowing water all over the place, measuring temperatures and pressures, and you need chemical engineers. How in the world can you pull a project like that in 2 semesters, starting from nothing? All that you have to start with are filters that you can buy from a supplier. So in order for this to happen, you need to plan, when are you going to order the aluminum to build the wheel? When are you going to order the motors? When are you going to order the microcontrollers? Who's going to order them? What are the parts that you're going to manufacture? Who's going to manufacture them? Who's going to do the drawings and when? And if you're going to choose a motor, there are thousands of motors that you can choose from, big ones and little ones, and motors whose motions are very easily measured. So the project is so complex that you need to plan what's going to happen every week and who is going to do this. So IPPD teaches the students how to do it. As a matter of fact, my preference as a coach is to appoint one student as a team leader. That's a rotating position. And the team leader needs to understand that the team leader doesn't do any work other than manage everybody else. The team leader is facilitator. The team leader is the communicator. The team leader is who I speak to and with. And the team leader is the one who speaks with the liaison engineer. I don't want anybody else to come into my office and tell me what's going on if the team leader doesn't know first. Because one person needs to develop the experience of making sure that on that date of November 5th or that date of January 20th, the wheel is ready to be installed and connected to the motor. And the motor has to be in place, and the frame of the motor has to be in place, and the chemical engineers have to have the hoses that connect the machine to the water supply, not only ordered, but they're of the right length and the right connectors with the right connectors, so that everything falls in place. This is an experience that you do not get in a regular classroom by reading a book and doing homework. The other thing that happens in IPPD that is of great educational value is that in most engineering classes, with the exception of the design classes, the assignment that a student is given has typically already been solved by the professor or by the author of the book. In this particular case, there is at the beginning an assessment of the feasibility of the project, but nobody's done it. Nobody even knows if it can be done. So one of the things that happens is that something always goes wrong. For example, we needed to reduce the size of a nozzle, And the part that we needed was not in stock, and the delivery date for that part was, as given by the manufacturer, the supplier, was the last day of classes. That's a big problem to have to solve, okay? So normally, if you just simply say, okay, I failed, the project fails, and engineers can't fail. So we solved that problem. We built our own. Those type of surprises, those types of hiccups sometimes are very serious. Something that we discovered recently is that when somebody sells you lumber and they say that is 1 inch by 1 inch, well, it turns out that it's 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch. And my other team built a machine that would fit a 1 inch by 1 inch, stick of wood into a device. And when we went and bought the sticks of wood, they were just simply too small for the machine. So by learning how to manage a program, you have target dates, and when something goes wrong, at that point it's possible to go to the point of failure in time and say, how do we plan so the other things that need to be done in the ensuing weeks are going to be completed on a different schedule so that we resolve this problem, but still on time to satisfy the project requirements.
Wow. So Oscar, you're describing a world of teaching and practical application which is very different. It's connected, but it's very different than you standing in front of a class, giving a lecture on engineering principles or methods. What types of skills have you had to learn to become a good mentor that are, say, different than a standard engineering teacher or professor?
Well, I have great admiration for engineering teachers and professors, so it's very hard to beat any of them at anything. What is different is that when you teach engineering, you have a paradigm that you follow. You can do what the hundreds of teachers that you encountered before did with you in class. How do you do that in IPPD when none of us had an IPPD experience? So I enter the IPPD program with a great level of reticence. I did not think initially that a multidisciplinary engineering program was going to teach our students the same kind of design skills that we teach engineering students in the chemical engineering department. So I held that very poor opinion of the design component of the program for 2 years, until the director of the program, when I made a comment like that, said, well, why don't you give a lecture about how do you do design in chemical engineering? So I went and I took one of the most classic books on engineering design, and I started making a table of what we did in chemical engineering, and much to my surprise, absolutely everything was being taught in IPPD, but it had a different name because the IPPD concepts are formulated so that they fit electrical engineering and chemical engineering and industrial engineering. So that was a very big learning experience for me. I had to take a step back and I said, wow, why didn't somebody teach me this when I was a student? Okay, so now the teacher became now a student again, and through the years I always encounter somebody, either a student or a professor, who says, oh, this part of IPPD just doesn't apply to what we do in this particular engineering discipline. And I just know in my heart that after a while, when they do it and practice it, they will change their mind. Yeah. They will change their mind because indeed this program is a super engineering program. It has everything that I think an engineering student in a quality program should have. IPPD takes engineering students and in 2 semesters makes them into legitimate practicing engineers. Just an amazing feat. When I start with the students in August, there is a level of naivete that is extraordinary. They are still in the mode that, if I say the right things now, I get the good grade, okay? I invest an awful lot of time training them to develop a very clear understanding of the expectations. At the beginning, the early steps are disastrous. Nobody's ever able to meet a deadline, a deliverable of quality, because they never had to do something that has direct impact. If you solve a problem to an 80% of accuracy in a homework problem, in a homework assignment, maybe you get 8 points, okay? You do 80% accuracy in your project, you get 0. So what happens in January is that these students who came into the program with tremendous talent, but with an attitude towards learning that was exam-centric, have become extremely competent engineers. And I now even take the liberty of telling every one of my industrial liaison engineers that they will see the students evolve. And in January, I want them to look at them again and see if they are the same people. They are not the same people again. One of the distinguishing qualities of IPPD is that these students have to hold a weekly teleconference with the liaison engineer. Every week you call your liaison engineer, the entire group is there in this teleconference, and they report what have they done that week, what will they do next week, what's on schedule, and what's behind, okay? At the beginning, the teleconferences are very, very childish. The students don't know what to say. You hear lots of okay, and then you hang up, and I ask the students, okay, what are the action items? What are you going to do? Well, I don't know, okay? But you were talking to him or to her. What is this engineer expecting? And they're surprised that they were supposed to be taking notes. You can take notes in class. How do you take notes when you're talking to somebody who's your client? And that client expects you to do something, okay? So they develop a technique in my group. Every time that there is something that somebody needs to be done, you write it in your design notebook and you put a marker. In our group is AI, action item. That means that you look at the left margin of your notebook, and every time that you see an AI, you know that somebody has to do something. Then you put the initials of the person who's supposed to do it. And the team leader puts down the date when he or she assigned the action item, and then the date when it is completed. And then, we have all kinds of little tricks, like, WFs are for waiting for, somebody's supposed to be doing and is not there yet. So here comes January. The students pick up the phone, they greet the engineer on the other end, they start with the usual pleasantries about the weather, how everybody's feeling, they introduce themselves, they present them with an agenda. We want to talk about these things. Is there anything that you want to add? We go through item 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the agenda. They ask if the liaison engineer has any additional questions or issues that need to be discussed. The team leader asks the same question on our end, closes the teleconference, and you say, my God, I feel like I have been sitting in a professional engineering consulting outfit office. Perfect. And these are the same students. These are students who are 21 to 22 years old that 4 months before were not very different in their professional attitude than, let's say, a serious high school student. That's the best you could have gotten from them. And now they can go to an interview with any potential employer and be able to present themselves with the professional sheen that they actually got because of the IPPD experience.
That's wonderful. Oscar, some of your colleagues have, and the faculty have talked about, and you've touched on this, some of the important attributes of an IPPD student, and they've mentioned that there are really smart students who may not be not qualified is not the right word, but in other words, what they said is it takes more than just being smart. And what they've said is we have a lot of smart students in the College of Engineering at the University of Florida, but maybe not all of them are geared for the IPPD program. Can you talk about what are some of the attributes that you're looking for among students that you're trying to get into the program?
I think that through the years I have come to appreciate two attributes as the most significant in determining the success of a student at IPPD. The first attribute is reliability. This is something that young students, given the tremendous burden that they have with the other classes, find very difficult to satisfy. How can you get your stuff done when you said you're going to get it done, okay? No excuses. The excuse is a failure. The excuses are, for example, the resources were not adequate. Let's adjust the resources. The time frame was too short. Let's, make it longer. But, I was doing something else and I couldn't do this. Or, my cat scratched my hand, okay, which I have heard. Reliability. Do what you were supposed to do. That's number one. The number two is work ethos. Just be persistent and work. Be there. The rest of the attributes are, not attributes that are significantly differentiating, because the majority of students that we have in our program have already gone through a process of academic selection, so that when they are, last semester juniors or first semester seniors, you encounter very few people who cannot cope with the intellectual demands of the program. Now, a student who has a very high GPA is erroneously considered by us to be a top student. It just turns out that the student with the best GPA is the one who can perform best in the exams, period. And anybody who has a very high GPA can perform well in the exams because that individual understands concepts, can learn them, some of them because they can learn them quickly, some of them because they work very hard to learn them. But that doesn't mean that they will be reliable when the task is uncertain, when you need to interact with 4 or 5 people, when you need to, be available to provide your component to somebody else. They can do it very well when it's them and the book. The second thing that they cannot necessarily do is roll up their sleeves and pick up a wrench and continue to work on those pipes or continue to solder the leads of your electronic board until you finally get the bug out. So top GPA students are very competent. They know a lot, but they're not always, and in fact, in my experience, they are not necessarily the best IPPD students. So I can give you one example of an extraordinarily gifted student who was a 4.0 GPA in chemical engineering, an extraordinary feat. I myself, if I had to go through the chemical engineering program again here at the University of Florida, I would not have a 4.0. That student was not very successful in IPPD, and in fact was not very successful as a graduate student in a very famous school, because he still continued to get good grades, but was not able to develop the skills that were necessary to be successful in research or in getting practical and relevant things done. Many of the students that I have appreciated most in terms of their contribution to the program happen to be students who did not have an outstanding GPA. And IPPD recognized that very early on. When we screen students, we know their GPAs because, we are their teachers, but we ask them other questions that are very relevant, such as, do you work on your car? Have you ever fixed a bicycle tire? We want to know if they have, in their prior experience, some activities that indicate that they would be willing to roll up their sleeves and get stuff done. So if somebody has a low GPA, but is somebody who works in changing the oil of the car, or is somebody who enjoys repairing her bike, that already tells you that this person is going to build a prototype, a device, and an instrument, and is not going to shy away. And if the GPA is not a very high GPA, you are willing to take a chance on that individual and put it in a team on a critical project, and things not only will work out, but they have been proven to work out.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Oscar, now I'm going to ask you kind of a change over time versus continuity question, because you have a lot of experience in working in IPPD as a member of the faculty. What has changed over time in the program, but what also has remained stable? So I guess kind of a change over time versus kind of, yeah.
Well, what has changed over time is the IPPD started as an idea with very little institutional resources available, and it is today the same idea with an incredibly rich base of resources. So what's different today is that the students have a central repository for their documents, so that the documents do not reside in their individual computers. They work on their computers, but the work is actually uploaded into a site that is able to keep track of revisions. The students have a very well-documented process for running the project from day one till the final presentation, to the delivery of the prototype or of the instrument or the process design to the client company. So that's what's very different. At the beginning, IPPD was improvising at creating the resources on the spot. Now we even have a guide that I was fortunate to be invited to participate as one of the co-authors for the liaison engineer. After we had gone through this process over very many years, we decided that it was important for the liaison engineers to have a document that would tell them what is it that we are expecting from you, because they have not had that experience before, working with a multidisciplinary group of undergraduate students. So what's different is that our resource infrastructure is just simply extraordinarily rich. What is the same is that every single year you start with a project that you don't know how you're going to solve, with a team of students who just know how to solve equations and answer questions, and you end up with a working prototype that has the same quality of an instrument, of a machine, or a testing system that a professional consulting company would put on the table. That we did at the beginning, and that we do now.
Mm-hmm. Great. Oscar, if you could say one thing to the IPPD community and to future engineers, what would it be?
Well, to the current IPPD community, I would say, learn everything that is taught in IPPD well, because every single topic that we ask you to learn about is a differentiator in terms of your career path. You will hit the road with knowledge that your peers will not have. That's what I would tell them. Do it. If you're a software engineer, learn how project management is done for anybody else so that you can go ahead and interact with them. If you are a chemical engineer, learn how do you propose different ideas to solve the project. Learn how to do this, because creativity is something that to some extent you have in yourself, but you actually can produce it by practicing. Learn how do you go in a room full of people who have a very good understanding of engineering, are very proud of their accomplishments, and you're able to produce an idea that you can articulate without fear of that idea being naive. You have a lot of very harsh peers, but if you don't have that naive idea that appears to contradict some of the basic principles, but it achieves something that gives the product what we call an engineering delighter, it would be written off because it is impractical, but it's going to be kept because somebody's going to say, wow, what you wanted was 3 lights, a red, green, and blue, that are going to give 3 different indications to the operator of the state of the machine, okay? And you cannot do it because we don't have electrical supply in the field, but we could do it with a battery, okay? So the idea is that you need to learn how to think out of the box and not to be critical. Engineers are very, very good at saying that's wrong, okay? Because I did the calculations, okay? We're not trying to figure out in a creative fashion how can we do it in spite of the fact that the initial analysis is wrong. So learn how to generate ideas. And then when you have 10 different ideas, learn how to organize them so that you know which ideas fit more closely with the needs and wants and the specifications of the project. And then you can do your ranking of these ideas and go to your supervisors or go to the client and say, these are the 3 ideas that we propose because these are the ways in which they are aligned with the project. You need to know how to do that if you are a chemical engineer. You need to know how to do that if you're a mechanical engineer. You need to do that, learn how to do that and know how to master that technique if you are a software engineer. So in summary, for those of you who are looking at me, if you're taking this class, learn everything because it will be useful to you. To the engineering community at large, what I would say is that they should recognize that this type of engineering experience is something that should be incorporated in every engineering program in the nation. And if they are practicing in a company, they should consider promoting this type of programs with the different colleges that are in their area, not because it is important to support education and train better engineers to make sure that we can together build a better world, because these engineering students can do outstanding quality of work for these companies. The match is perfect. The students learn, the company gets a product, we all advance, we make the world a better place.
Right. Now for that moment that you've been waiting for, the one-word moment, can you describe the IPPD program in one word?
The answer is no, I can't.
Okay, that's an honest answer.
That's a good answer. I can use a series of words perhaps that are describing the more descriptive of the effect that the program has on the career of an engineer. So I would use one word first, and I would say transformative. The IPPD program makes engineering students become legitimate engineers. But I could tell you lots of other things that describe the IPPD program, and that is one environment where we learn to do what our educational system typically prevents us from learning, which is the effective ability to work with others. When those people have not only the cultural differences that each one of us brings to the table, but also very, very different educational backgrounds. That is perhaps the best I can do to be succinct when describing the attributes of IPPD.
Those are great descriptions. As we wrap up, Oscar, are there any other thoughts or observations you have about you've given us really tremendously rich information, but are there any things we haven't touched on that you'd like to?
I think that there's something that I would like to add is that IPPD has had a very significant influence on my own development as a teacher. I think that IPPD has been the richest teaching experience that I've had in more than 2 decades of toiling in the vine. It changed the way that I assess the evolution of the learner. It's changed the ways in which I appreciate the contributions of the learner. And more important, it has given me an appreciation for the limitless potential of young people to be creative, to be innovative, and to become that elusive individual who, as an engineer, believe it or not, works in the same way as an artist.
Now, it may be that no engineering class is conventional, but how do you as a professor translate the experiences that you developed in IPPD into a conventional class? I mean,
that's a very, very good question, because I found myself doing this on two fronts, okay? You were talking about classes, but one type of teaching that we do at the University of Florida, which is a teaching and research institution, is what happens in the lab. What do I teach my graduate students? Not research-wise in terms of how to solve the problem, but in terms of methodology. And I apply IPPD concepts. In fact, I ask all my graduate students to read one of the two books that we utilize at IPPD. And in the first and second year of our interaction in the long path towards a 5-year PhD, every week we discuss one chapter. And my intention is to instill in them the ability to identify the tools that would allow them to manage their research, the tools that would enable them to be creative, the tools that would enable them to sort and rank different ideas. So on that component of teaching, I use it all the time. What has the part of IPPD that has really infiltrated my teaching at the undergraduate level is the very, very strong contribution that IPPD does to develop effective communication skills, writing skills, and technical presentation skills in the students. Because in IPPD, you write, 200-page long reports. Okay, the technical report that I just submitted to my Siemens liaison engineer is 362 pages long, and they give presentations to an audience composed of engineers. So in my classes, whenever the format of the class allows it, I work to instill those skills in the students. So for example, I have created what I call it a 1-hour workshop on how to give a presentation that I do in every senior class that I teach. I have also developed some techniques for teaching technical writing without substituting the technical writing courses that the students need to take. So through the years, I figured out what is it that is hard for the students to do. Why is it that they have writer's block? Let me just give you one example. One trick that an engineering student should know is that whenever you have a figure, the figure has to have an accompanying paragraph. And that accompanying paragraph should start with figure 1 shows, and then the first part of the paragraph tells the reader what the reader's eye see, 3 lines, X and Y, and 2 equations. And the second part of the paragraph has to tell the reader, what does it mean? It means that the temperature increases, it means that there is a failure, it means that the process is within spec, it means that the process is reliable. So every time that you have to write a report and you have a figure, you paste your figure, you say figure 1 shows, you tell the reader what it is, you tell them what's in it. How can you have writer blocks after that? Okay? No excuses. That little trick is something that I teach also to for example, the students who take my senior control class when they write the report on their project. That's an IPPD legacy.
All right. All right, Oscar. Well, this is wonderful. Thank you for doing the interview, and it's been incredibly helpful for the whole process.
Well, the pleasure has been all mine. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.